Hello friends, welcome back. In this session, we are going to discuss hardware security, trojans, and more. It's going to be taken as 6 or 7 parts, and we will see all the detailed contents in a very nice way. And this is one of the most important topics when it comes to security. We will learn about the hardware security, and in detail, it will be learned right now. All right, let's set the expectation for the session very clearly. It's going to be moderately technical session, and we are not going to go deeper into research perspective. It will create awareness, it will be moderately technical, and it's going to be interesting. The agenda is very simple out here. We'll start with the hardware security introduction. Then we will discuss the hardware trojans. Followed by that, classifications will be discussed. And how do we detect and prevent hardware trojans will be discussed. Then we will look into the challenges in the hardware trojan detection. And then we will go into the emerging research and techniques in trojan mitigation, followed by some interesting case study. And then we will go for discussion. I'll take it over a number of sessions and it's going to be interesting. Let's start with part one, the beginning. Introduction to hardware security. Let's define it first. Hardware security fundamentally involves protecting components, physical components. Here, what do we mean as physical components mostly is all about the chips and the processors. And what do we protect it from? We protect it from malicious tampering, unauthorized access, and exploitation. Now, I'll read it again. Hardware security is all about protecting physical components like the chips and the processors from malicious tampering, unauthorized access, and exploitation. Why is it important? Do we have to really bother about the hardware security? Yes, it's super important, and the reasons are listed. First one is critical infrastructure. Hardware underpins key systems, like it's going to be the fundamental for the power grids, defense, financial systems, and a lot more. So you cannot go ahead and compromise the security features there, which, if you do, can lead to widespread disruptions. So it's very critical for the infrastructure to be run, to be maintained, and that way we need to ensure the hardware security is looked into in right aspect. And foundational protection is the next very important point we need to look into. Unlike software, hardware often has more severe vulnerabilities. The reason being very simple, because the physical tampering can really allow and ease attackers to bypass all the software safeguards. If there is a flaw in the hardware, it not only attacks the physical structure and the physical presence of the hardware, but also it can disrupt the software safeguards as well. Long-term reliability is another aspect of it. We need to ensure the system integrity over time. Compromised hardware can create long-lasting security risks, and that's going to be even more troublesome. And it will be very hard to detect and eliminate as well. For these reasons, which include critical infrastructure, foundational protection, and long-term reliability, we need to look into hardware security with utmost priority. Hardware versus software vulnerabilities. We need to understand the differences very nicely, and it's going to be very interesting. I'm going to take it in a step-by-step manner, and I have made a clear table for your reference, and it's going to be easy for you. When you talk about hardware vulnerabilities, I can define it as the flaws in physical components that attackers can exploit. I repeat, it is the flaws in the physical components that attackers can exploit. When it comes to software, it is the flaws in the code or software that can be exploited by the malicious actor. So when you see it, it's physical components in the hardware. When you see it in the software vulnerabilities, it is going to be the flaws in the code or in the software. Persistence, yes, typically permanent when it comes to hardware vulnerabilities, and it's difficult to fix once the deployment has been completed. Software vulnerabilities are easy to be fixed. They are temporary and they can often be fixed with patches or software updates. You've heard a lot about it, right? So that way it's going to be easy. Fixing method. You need to go ahead with the physical recall or replacement of the affected components when it comes to hardware vulnerability. But software, it can be easily patched. Even remotely, it can be patched or it can be updated. Example can be very simple. Hardware Trojan in a chipset enabling unauthorized data access is a simple example. Yes, hardware Trojan in a chipset. Understand, it's attacking the processor and the chips right away. Buffer overflow in a web app allowing data breaches is a software vulnerability example. Lifecycle threat, how is it connected to it? Vulnerabilities can be introduced at any stage when it comes to hardware. It can be the design, manufacturing, or deployment. Vulnerabilities typically arise during the coding and the testing phases when it comes to software. So hardware vulnerability, it's going to be at any stage. Software, specifically, it could be during coding and testing phases. How much difficult it is to detect the hardware vulnerabilities? Very hard to detect when it comes to hardware because the need for the physical inspection or specialized testing is more when it comes to hardware. But when it comes to software, it's going to be pretty easier. You can detect through the code reviews, testing tools, and scanning software. They are all available in abundance these days, and it's going to be simple for you. Risk scope. It is very high impact. Compromised hardware may affect all software also running on it, and hence hardware vulnerabilities have higher risk. Software vulnerabilities are a lesser riskier when you compare it to hardware vulnerabilities. Usually, they are limited to specific applications or systems. Unless the software vulnerability goes and impacts at OS level functions, it's not going to be that threatening. Example of the risk when it comes to hardware vulnerabilities can be like compromised processor firmware, allowing data manipulation at a low level. When it comes to software, it's well-known SQL injection attack on a database-enabled application. Scalability of attacks, how much scalable it could be when it comes to hardware. Low scalability typically when it comes to hardware because the physical access, all those things will be a problem. And supply chain vulnerabilities really increase the risk. When it comes to software, it is highly scalable. When it is network system, it's going to be easily scalable. Malware can spread at a rocket speed and it's very easy to spread it across the network. So when it comes to hardware, it's low scalability due to need for physical access. But when it comes to software, it can be easily scaled up. Fix speed. How much faster can you fix these kind of vulnerabilities? If it is hardware, it's going to be slow. Mostly physical replacement is recommended and it can lead to high spending as well. It could be delayed as well. When it comes to software, it's going to be fast and quick fixes, updates are available. And remotely also we can fix it up. Some notable cases are already in the history which can be referred here. Supermicro motherboard tampering case is a very famous case study. I'm going to talk about it at the end of it with respect to the hardware vulnerabilities. Heartbleed vulnerability in the OpenSSL, which allowed sensitive data exposure across the web servers, is another very important software vulnerability which can be referred as a case study. So we understood the differences between the hardware and the software vulnerabilities very clearly in this section. Well, what is the current landscape and the threats that we have in the hardware security? Rise of sophisticated attacks is the first and foremost problem that we are looking into. We have got advanced persistent threats. We call it APTs. They are increasingly targeting hardware vulnerabilities, and that's one point that we have to be worried about. Stuxnet exploited the hardware controllers to disable the critical infrastructure, and it has shown the potential of hardware targeted attacks to the industry. Second threat that we have here is supply chain vulnerability. There is a risk at every stage when it comes to hardware. Components can be compromised during various stages. It could be during the design, manufacturing, or assembly. That can lead to unauthorized access and Trojan implants. So it can be at any stage. Risk is there at each and every stage when it comes to hardware. For example, you can tamper any hardware. For example, in the history, supermicro motherboards highlighted risks in global supply chains. So that's one thing that we can look into as an example here. So the tampering of supermicro motherboards, it is a simplest of the case study that you can highlight here, and you should be very careful about it. Growth in IoT device vulnerabilities. That's the next point that we need to discuss. Many IoT devices lack robust security, creating chances for large-scale botnet attacks. For example, we must have heard of the Mirai botnet, which has exploited insecure IoT devices throughout to launch massive DDoS attacks, impacting major services. It was a disruption. We need to understand that. So, the growth in IoT device vulnerabilities is a major problem. And increasing Trojan implantation, that's another very important trouble that we have in front of us. Malicious modifications can be introduced covertly to alter device behavior or even to leak data. You can either alter or leak data, and that's also happening through the hardware trojans. The small trojan in a chip can be very dangerous, and it could allow the attackers to monitor or manipulate data across the system. So that's going to be a super problem waiting for you. Now, we need to understand how do we go ahead and counter all these problems. We can focus on the trusted manufacturing and design, which means we need to go ahead and look into options for secure design protocols. The emphasis should be paid on using trusted foundries, which can ensure chips are manufactured without tampering. And anti-tamper technologies related innovations should really come up. New innovations, new methods like physically unclonable functions, we call it PUF, can really help in authenticating the hardware. And when you talk about emerging threats in consumer electronics, yes, smart devices are really opening doors for more of these threats. Increased attack on smartphones, wearables, and home assistants that contain sensitive user data is a strong concern. Unauthorized access through vulnerabilities in phone process can really lead to privacy breaches and can leak a lot of personal data, and that could be devastating for the user as well as for the organizations. All right, with that, we complete the part one of it. And in the next session, we're looking into understanding the hardware trojans. If you like the channel, the content, please subscribe. Thank you.